Welcome to the Think Yourself Healthy podcast, where you meet the intersection of mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Heather Duranja, founder of Nutrition Vixen, registered dietitian, nutritionist, personal trainer, and cognitive behavioral specialist. I'm a mother, author, self-improvement junkie, and recovering perfectionist turned professional half-asser. Each week, I'll be bringing on a guest or a topic that will help you go from surviving to thriving. Are you with me? All right, here we go with today's episode. All right. So on today's show, we have Dr. Jordin Wiggins. She is a naturopathic doctor, entrepreneur, women's sexual health disruptor, and author. She is revolutionizing the way we deliver, educate, and talk about sexual health, wellness, and pleasure for women. In her private practice, Health Overall, located in Fonthill, Ontario, Dr. Wiggins and her team are experts on hormone and mood imbalance, libido, biomarker testing, and providing individualized healthcare so that their patients can wake up energized and ready to take on their day. Who doesn't want that? Dr. Wiggins is the founder of the Pleasure Collective, an online coaching community and sexual health and wellness re-education program for women. She is setting a high standard for women's sexual health, using pleasure as the way back to better relationships, desire, and outstanding health, not another pill. Thank you so much, Dr. Wiggins, for being here. I am so excited to have you on as a guest. Sex is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Women tend to want to deny themselves of the pleasure that they innately need. So I feel it's important that we have these kind of conversations, and I love the fact that you're all about it.
Thanks so much for having me, Heather. I cannot wait to talk about sex, vulvas, pleasure. It's so difficult to find this information or reliable information. So happy to be here and share with your audience.
Well, thank you again. I know you've got a lot of exciting things going on in your life right now. So it's truly an honor to have you on. And I'm ready to dive in and start talking all things libido and why it's important for women's health. So let me hear it.
All right. Well, let's just to start. Lack of pleasure is a health problem, and it's affecting over half of women today.
Wow.
And if there is another health concern that affects 50% of women, I don't know what it is. It's not the research numbers are not supporting it. And I'm not sure about you, but the women that I work with, it's more like 80 or 90% have sexual dysfunction and low libido.
Yeah. I know in my practice, working specifically with women, this is a part of themselves that they deny. They don't feel happy in their bodies. They're not comfortable with their weight. They have these chronic diseases. And so they're so disconnected from their sexual health. And ultimately, being disconnected from that sexual health is taking a major impact on their overall well-being. So from your perspective, I'd like to know, what are some of the consequences that you see in practice with having a low libido?
So one of the main links that we see is to mental health, lower mood, depressive disorders, anxiety. And we can get into this, but it does have to do with some hormonal cascades that we can work to balance. So the link with low libido and low mood is huge. And we're seeing patients going to their physicians and saying, I'm just not myself. Something's not right. I don't enjoy life like I used to. I'm not as motivated as I used to. And medically speaking, that's called anhedonia. And that's the lack of joy or the ability to experience pleasure.
Anhedonia?
Anhedonia.
Anhedonia. Yeah. Okay.
And that is one of the diagnostic criteria for depression. But what's happening is women are getting prescribed an antidepressant, which several of them, low libido is a side effect of antidepressants. So
it's just contributing to the problem.
It's contributing to the problem and not actually getting to the root. But I sort of think that we should be looking at anhedonia on its own, because the women that I work with, they fit that criteria. They're not as happy as they used to be. They're not, energetic, joyful. They've really lost that spark. But an antidepressant isn't the answer. The depression diagnosis is not the answer. So I'll see women on an antidepressant when really their problem is lack of joy, low libido, and some hormonal issues underlying that just haven't been properly diagnosed and treated.
Right. So for the woman who goes to the doctor, has the low libido, is experiencing the depression, gets prescribed the antidepressant, starts taking the antidepressant, starts feeling even lower, less energy, less of a sex drive, where does she go from there?
So the questions that I'm always asking at the beginning is, with low libido, we want to figure out, is there an underlying physical, a component on the cellular level that's contributing, or is it a mindset? And just a lot of times my patients will say to me, I want to have sex, but just the want is not there. They'll say, if I never have sex again in the rest of my life, I wouldn't care. I only care because of my partner. It's so terrible. It's a big issue. And it's not one that we're really comfortable discussing, or most women aren't comfortable discussing it.
Right. Well, I think we've been kind of taught that over decades and decades that, that's a part of us that isn't proper, right?
Exactly.
I know when I was getting married, my grandmother gave me some advice, and she told me, you must be a lady in the living room and a whore in the bedroom. And I literally took that advice and ran with it. But it wasn't something that I felt comfortable talking with other people about. I felt, that I would be judged if I talked about how high my sex drive actually was and how high my desire to be pleasured was. And so in return, for women who are experiencing the opposite, I think there's that fear of judgment, having those conversations with other women. I know for myself, amongst all of my friends, as a woman in her mid-40s, I can't relate with my other girlfriends because my sex drive is much higher. They don't have a desire. And so for me, I'm like, I can't understand where you're at. I don't relate to that. It makes it very challenging. And then I feel guilty wanting to share anything about myself because they're not on the same page. And then I'm like judging myself, saying, is there something wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why do I want it so bad? So what are your thoughts around that?
I think the fact that we're having these conversations, whether, yours is higher and you're saying, I can't relate, we need to have those conversations as well, because women, it seems like they're accepting the idea that, oh, I'm just getting older.
Right.
After children, it's not the same, when really we shouldn't be settling for that. We should, because high libido to me is a sign that everything else is functioning properly on the cellular level. Hormones are balanced. You're not inflamed. Adrenals and the stress response is all working properly. So libido to me really is a warning sign that other things are off balance. Right. So on the cellular level, we definitely want to look. The questions that I'm asking to begin with, and this is just something that people can ask themselves, is, am I having pain with sex? Do I have difficulty lubricating when you're getting aroused? And do I have trouble orgasming? So those issues, if those are problems, there is a very good likelihood that there is an underlying hormone imbalance, not enough estrogen. Several of my patients think that their issue is low testosterone, but with the thousands of women that we've worked with at my clinic, and this has also been research proven, serum levels of testosterone, so levels of testosterone in the blood, does not correlate with libido whatsoever. So I'll have women, they have really low testosterone, or what we would think is low normal, and their libido's fine. And women who have no libido whatsoever, we test their testosterone and it's high normal, and not correlated. So it doesn't seem to be correlated at all with the actual want to have sex.
Okay.
So I'm always looking at hormone testing, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, thyroid, inflammatory markers. We're really looking at a more holistic approach. Cortisol testing to see how adrenals are functioning, because we could do an entire conversation on how the stress response.
I mean, personally, I feel that really truly is the root cause of why we have such hormonal imbalances, specifically with our sex hormones. When we're constantly in that state of fight or flight, we can't allocate the production of appropriate sex hormones because those aren't required to sustain life. And so, I entitled this podcast, Think Yourself Healthy, because the reality is it all starts with our thoughts. The thoughts trigger the stress response, and then from there, a cascade of hormonal, physiological things occur that we can't control at that point, but we can control the thought to help reduce that response. So, so talk to me. Tell me more about all of this. This is fascinating.
So you could not have said that better. More often than not, if women can orgasm, and difficulty achieving orgasm is one thing, but I'm talking about like not being able to orgasm no matter what is a big red flag that there's a hormone problem. Issues with pain during sex, like tearing, usually in perimenopause, especially in menopause, as estrogen's dropping, that can be an issue. And oftentimes it can easily be fixed with a hormonal cream, like a bioidentical hormone cream that you apply once or twice a week. And that can do wonders for women.
So with the tearing, that's a result of having less estrogen, which reduces flexibility of tissue?
Yeah. So generally speaking, and we'd want to test to make sure that this actually is the case, but less estrogen makes the tissue much more friable, delicate, less elastic over time. So when you're aroused, we would want the vagina to be able to expand. And also that links to the stress response as well. Because if you are in fight or flight and you're not able to relax, we're going to have issues with arousal just because of that. So there's these underlying hormone issues, but we also cannot ignore the stress response. And
so from ultimately, if we're in a stress state and we're trying to have sex, that isn't a survival circumstance. Therefore, the body is not going to get wet in order to allow that to naturally occur, right?
Exactly. So we do a 12-week program specifically on mindset for women.
Okay.
So we kind of check these things like, that's amazing. And this is really where we are changing things for women. We're changing things for their relationships, because it's a big problem, especially when there's partners with two different levels of desire. It can be an issue in a relationship for years, and there's resentment. And then women feel like they're not, there's something wrong with them. They're not enough for their partners, and they're sort of,
So ultimately, there's a lot of shame that is associated when we're having a low libido. And research shows that shame is the number one thought that elicits the stress response in the body.
Exactly. So we are shutting down libido even more. We're worsening that disconnection with the partner.
So ultimately, if someone is focusing on the mindset component alone, it can actually support the physiological components by allowing the body to reduce the stress response, therefore being able to produce hormones as needed, correct?
Exactly. And this is very important in perimenopause and menopause, when the ovaries are not producing hormone like they were when you're in your 20s, and we're relying on the adrenals to do that. So it is so important. And that's why it's a 12-week program, because we can literally get women lubricating on their own again, actually wanting sex again, as opposed to just, oh, well, I try and go to bed at a different time than my husband to not have him initiate.
See, and there's shame associated with that.
Exactly. And really, it's so rewarding for my team and I, because we're not only helping, and once your hormones are balanced, weight's easier to manage.
Absolutely.
You have energy. So yes, it is about libido and sex, but everything's better, because if you're having great sex and orgasms, and we know what that does hormonally for balancing everything, it's amazing. We're really not only fixing a self-esteem belief system, we're improving communication in relationships. And it's just fascinating to watch women's lives transform.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. I love it. I mean, I feel so grateful personally that I'm in a place where I have a great sex drive. I have the desire. I'm able to have the pleasure that comes with that. And then also all of the physical attributes of that, right? And I know that for myself, it's not just nutrition. It's not just exercise. What's going on in my head is a major component of allowing all of those things to flow effortlessly to keep me where I'm at, specifically associated with my sex drive. So, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm sure this will probably get edited out, but I'm sitting here thinking you're like the psychologist for the pussy.
Oh, please don't edit it out. I love it.
I mean, it's the reality. You are the psychologist for the pussy. You help women take the shame and guilt out of what they're experiencing and allow them the freedom and the tools needed to be able to embrace their sexuality and allow themselves to, again, discover pleasure, which is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love my job that I get to talk about vulvas every day at work.
I love it. It's awesome. It's fabulous. So do you think that part of the problem with women is that they're so disconnected from themselves? Life is running them. They're not in control of their own body, their own thoughts. And then that also creates a disconnect with their partner, their spouse, whoever it is that they're trying to be intimate with. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think at the beginning of a relationship, when things are new, because that's what people always say. At the beginning, it was great. We don't know what happened.
Right.
And one of the modules in the program is specifically about desire.
Okay.
And I will ask my patients in our first meet and greet is, what do you desire? And I get met with blank stares or tears. because we are so busy, we are so used to prioritizing everyone else's needs before our own, that maybe if sex is on the to-do list, it's sort of at the end of the night and it's just something that you're going to do to get over with for your partner.
We
It's
schedule
not
it like
even
a task, like a chore.
And I'm not against, we call them at the Pleasure Collective, we call them intimacy dates, which are scheduled times for you and your partner to do something that will promote connection. It doesn't even need to be intercourse, but something that will bring you pleasure and bring you both closer. Because when we just live that usual life where, you know, it's so busy, we're in fight or flight, and then all of a sudden we want to just flip and have sex, it's not going to happen. So I find, because I'm sure you are busy as well, but if it's not on the calendar, if there's not some time blocked out, it just seems like it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I think it's awesome, the work that you guys are doing with your Pleasure Collective. So many women out there need this. They need to hear these conversations. We have to embrace these conversations with each other. I think that, I think there's a lot of women who are going to be listening, who are going to be silently singing praises, saying, "Oh my God, I'm not alone. Like there is hope. There is hope." So why do so many women suffer from sexual dysfunction compared to men? And how do we change this?
So this is the mindset piece, and we need sexual health re-education. And we need to teach women a language for how to, number one, we need to figure out what we want. And number two, we need to figure out how to communicate it, which is fascinating. I think that the main reason why, there's two things. The shame that we sort of mentioned before. So with women, we are sexualized. We'll see that in the media, movies, advertisements, pornography, for the most part, is very male pleasure focused. But we are not allowed to be sexual without the attachments of, you know, slut. Can I say that? You
Judgment.
can edit that out if you want.
No, I mean, it's judgment. It is. It's those negative connotations that we hear for women specifically. If we desire the sex and we're expressive about that, there's judgment that comes with it, not only from other women, but also from men.
Exactly. And we don't see women sexual at different stages throughout life. Women that are pregnant being sexual, menopausal women that are sexual, women that are in their 70s and sexual, because sex is an evolution throughout life, and it should just get better and better and better. But what we are all trying to do is what we were taught for the most part, which is male as default reproductive health. So that's penis and vagina, orgasm, you know, male orgasms, maybe the female does or doesn't, because it's not really important for not necessary for reproduction. And that's what we're all taught in school. So it's almost, that is the default. We're not taught pleasure.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you just said women's orgasm is not dependent upon reproduction. However, for a man, it's the complete opposite. Without the orgasm, we can't create, right? That's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah. So and we're not educated. So 70% of women need clitoral stimulation for orgasm.
Okay.
And if we're focusing on penetrative sex because that is how men orgasm, for 70% of women, they're not really enjoying the sex on the menu.
Do you think it's hard for women to express to their partner that they need that clitoral stimulation? Do you think that that's a a thing that might be difficult to verbalize?
Definitely. And I did not, when I started working with women on this level, because it just was something that was so challenging for me to fix in my practice. Communication is huge. My patients will have been with their partners for 15 years. They've had 2 kids, but they cannot say, honey, I need this, or it feels better when you do this. We don't have the language to communicate these needs for the most part. So
Is it that we
that's
don't
why
is it that we don't have the language, or do we not feel like we have the freedom to express it?
it's both. Because we've been educated for male as default sex model, I think women don't feel like they don't know what else is out there for them. So they don't know what to ask for, or if they do know, they just almost don't feel like they have the right, because they feel like there's something wrong with them. Because they're not fitting that Masters and Johnson, male and as default model of arousal.
Okay. That makes sense. So again, we go back to shame.
Yes, definitely back to shame. And there really is, the communication module is so fascinating to watch these women who are almost tongue-tied. And then when we break it down, I worked with a communication specialist, because that is how much we need help in this area to communicate.
Wow.
And it was a 1-week part of the 12-week program, but we've turned communication into 2 weeks, because that is how necessary that part is.
Wow. So you're really giving them hands-on tools that they can utilize to be able to verbalize to their partner exactly what they need to express.
Exactly. And in ways that are the people that do this program, they get homework handouts. We practice on our calls. Yeah. Because we need to.
Absolutely.
And to be able to communicate your needs in an area that is so intimate, firstly, and second of all, has most likely caused so many issues for so long. So there's, shame, resentment, all these other feelings surrounding it. We really do need the tools wrapped up in a nice little package for how can you say these things and get the intimacy back, get the desire back without hurting your partner's feelings or triggering them, because it's been a problem for years in most marriages or relationships with the women that we work with.
Probably since the beginning of human nature. Right?
Actually, yeah. Well, when I was doing research for my book, it was interesting because the clitoris and female pleasure really was paramount in a lot of cultures, and they thought that female orgasm was necessary for conception.
Oh, really?
And then throughout history, we've sort of shifted towards, we know that that's not true. And it's just more about male pleasure. And the clitoris has been left out of medical textbooks for decades.
Wow.
Which the only organ in the body designed solely for pleasure and feeling good is the clitoris.
Wow.
And it's been left out of textbooks for years.
That's so alarming.
So we are not allowed our pleasure, sort of. That's the underlying message.
Right. I mean, we're just completely denying a whole aspect to the human body and the physiology of sexual expression.
Yeah. And can you imagine a textbook without the head of a penis in it?
Right. Wow. Gosh, this is so interesting, all of this. So you mentioned a book. Tell me about this book.
So the book is The Pink Canary.
Oh, I love that.
It's the hidden secret to optimum women's wellness. I wrote it because I'm so excited and passionate about this work and women having the tools that they need to sort through this. There's worksheets in the book. There's exercises to do that we work with women one-on-one and kind of what we're doing in our programs. I just want everyone to buy this book, share it with their girlfriends, share it with their daughters, so that we can be having these conversations and have the tangible tools that people need to fix this problem.
You just mentioned something that I have to hit on. You said women need to be sharing it with their daughters. And I remember a certain situation when I was a very young girl. I was in kindergarten and it was nap time. I did what I normally did, which was go and hump my pillow to fall asleep. And the kindergarten teacher had an issue with it, called my mother, told my mother what had happened. And then my mother in return had a talk with me, told me what I was doing was, bad. I wasn't supposed to be doing that. And so ultimately that really created a problem for me moving forward with allowing myself to accept self-pleasure. I thought it was bad. I thought it was wrong. It was dirty. It was all of the things that we're told, right? So it took me years. It really had a negative impact in my marriage with my husband, my ex-husband, because I looked at sex as more of like a chore. I couldn't connect with myself from that perspective, and it had a lot of negative consequences. And so after I had my daughters, I felt it was really important that these were conversations I needed to have with them, to let them know that these were normal human feelings that we have, and that we can't suppress those desires, because ultimately it leads to way more problems. So I think it's awesome that you're encouraging mothers to be able to have these kind of conversations with their daughters. What advice do you have to a mother who is scared to death to have that conversation?
First of all, thank you so much for sharing that personal story, because much like you, almost all of the women that I work with have had some type of shame situation when they were younger around self-pleasure. I have, you have, it's very common, and we shame women more for it than we do men.
Right.
So this is a big thing that we need to be discussing more. And I think, first of all, we need to, as a mother, we need to deal with our own shame and guilt around sex and our beliefs first, so that we can, in a educated, space holding way, discuss these things with our children. Because if you have shame and resentment and all of that, how can you have a conversation where it's not going to come off like that with your children?
Yeah. I think that's a very valid point to make, and I appreciate your honesty around that. So I know as a parent, and I feel that most parents, they usually aren't willing to do things for themselves, but they are willing to do things for their children. So if a mother out there is struggling with her own sexual relationship, if she wants her daughter to have a better chance at having a healthier relationship in terms of sexuality, she really needs to empower herself to take control, do the work, so then she can help support her daughter in return. Is that correct?
100%. Okay. If that is really how we are going to fix this problem, is one by one individually. However, for some quick tips to talking with your children, and again, when we're having these conversations, we need to have a sex, birds and bees, that kind of conversation, but there should also be a conversation around pleasure and consent.
Mm-hmm.
So sex should feel good. You should feel safe. And consent is, by teaching about pleasure and consent, we're sending the message that sex should feel good, and you should be continually checking in with your partner, communicating with them as things progress, because consent should be, I know it's a big topic, but just for Cole's notes for this purpose, consent should be verbal and consent should be ongoing. So if you're teaching your children that number one, sex should feel good, and number two, you should be continually saying yes to whatever's happening. And if it's a no for you, it's okay to stop. So we need to have a pleasure conversation as well as a birds and bees conversation, and feeling safe. So all of this in long form is outlined in my book, The Pink Canary, but
I love the fact that you have dedicated your practice and your life to collecting the data, the information that is needed to provide people with the tools and resources to start moving in a direction that's going to make this a regular conversation, a place where we can freely talk about it and not feel judgment around it. We've been plagued with this for hundreds of, God only knows how long. I'm sure you probably have a better idea of that than myself, but I know that it's a long-standing problem that we've had in history associated with women and even men. So I applaud the work that you're doing. I think it's awesome. And it makes me curious to know, how did you end up pursuing this? What brought you here?
So two things. I had a great libido, great sexual experiences to begin with in my life. So I could identify with you, where my friends would say, you know, sex is painful, or I had awful sex. I was sort of like, what are you talking about? During my pre-med degree, I had anxiety, some depressive type symptoms, and my libido went away. And with it, so did that spark, that energy, that zest for life. So I was sort of like, what happened here? And I had I didn't actually have depression. I had a hormone imbalance, fixed the hormone imbalance, and my libido came back. Then a few years later, I had a Bartholin cyst operation, which there's probably lots of women out there that have also had this, but we don't talk about it because it has to do with our vaginas. Anyways, I had an operation. It wasn't done properly. It was repeated a second time, and it was basically the equivalent of a really bad episiotomy.
Okay.
Wow. In my early 20s.
Wow.
So then I got to deal with the whole like physical side of it.
Yeah.
And painful sex. So for me, because it happened twice, where I'd had good libido, had a mental health, sort of a mindset issue, and then the second time a physical issue where sex was painful. And both times I saw my light turn off and things were hard, and it just, libido was very much correlated to how well other things were going with my body. So I sort of thought, there's something here. And I ask on my intake forms for all of my patients and the women that we work with in the Pleasure Collective online, we're always saying, like, how is sex for you? How are you happy with how you're sexual with your partner? How are you happy with how you're sexual with yourself? And the overwhelming number of answers that kept coming in over the years, that this was a big problem and no one knew how to fix it.
Wow.
Because it had happened to me twice and I'd sort of had to find my own way out of it through research or educating myself, talking to women.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like this was just the work I had to do.
You found your purpose.
Yes.
You had a taste of it, you knew what it was like, and you were like, I can't not have that. And so you were determined to get to the bottom of it. And then also through that work, also figure out how to help other women who maybe never had a taste ever. And they don't even know what they're missing. Find it.
Yes, exactly. So that would, if I could help, one woman not have to go through a divorce or get prescribed antidepressants, because really that I don't think that it is depression in the majority of women. I think it's the fact that we don't know what we want. We don't know how to ask for what we want. We're not getting our hormones tested. We don't feel worthy of the pleasure that we actually deserve. So when we can work on the cellular level and the mindset level, that's where the magic happens. And life is good. It's easy. It's, joyful.
I can see and hear the passion in the work that you do. It's absolutely beautiful. I know that there are going to be a lot of people listening today who are going to really resonate with this conversation. And I guarantee you, you have reached at least one person today, if not many, many. So where can they find you? How can they reach out? How can they learn more about you? So I'm obsessed with you. I have to know everything, Dr. Jordin Wiggins.
So one of the best places to find me is my Instagram at Dr. Jordin Wiggins. I'm posting about this content all the time, so it's a great way to kind of interact. And if this is something that you have a question about, please feel free to direct message me because I will answer.
Excellent.
It might take me a couple days, but I will answer. And the next best place to find me is thepleasurecollective.com. Take a look there, tons of free content. We're always posting information. Our mailing list sends out all of like worksheets that we talk about this stuff for how to fix it, because it is really hard to get your hands on info that's actually going to help. Mm-hmm. And my book, The Pink Canary, is released March 10th. So definitely sign up for the mailing list on thepleasurecollective.com if you want to know about the pre-sale info to get your hands on a copy of that.
Exciting stuff. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations for all that you are doing and all of the women that you are out there serving and helping reconnect with themselves in an intimate way so that they can experience pleasure as they are supposed to. So Jordin, you're amazing. I will make sure to link all of those places so that the listeners can find you in the podcast notes. And I hope that I can have you on again, because I think there's so many things that we can talk about as we're having this conversation. My brain's going to all of these places, so many questions, and we just don't have enough time. So hopefully you'd be open to coming back. I'd love to have more conversations around all things libido and women.
Thank you, Heather. And I would love to come back and chat about this anytime.
Well, I appreciate you taking your time. It's been such a pleasure. And you're awesome, girl. You're just amazing.
Thank you. So are you. And thank you for being so open and honest about this conversation and really leading by example for women, because we need more of that.
I appreciate that. I know it's not difficult, or I know it's difficult for women to be able to be honest with themselves. And I feel that transparency is the best way to be honest with myself and to also help, provide a role model for others. So I'm all about having the difficult conversations, the things that most of us want to keep hidden away. I think it's important to have to express that, and I'll
We
take one
need
for the
to.
team.
We need to just to have the conversation is healing, because then
Absolutely.
women know they are not alone.
Right.
And the relief of that turns off the stress response, and that's therapeutic. So thank you for having a space where we can have these conversations.
Oh, absolutely. I thank you. Thank you for recognizing that. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me on the Think Yourself Healthy podcast. I'm so grateful that you stopped by. If you could just take a minute to share this episode with someone you think who would love it, it would be amazing. Take a screenshot that you've listened to the episode and tag at Think Yourself Healthy and myself at Nutrition Vixen so that I can share it. Leave a review on iTunes to let us know how much you loved being here and what you want to hear next. Until next time, don't forget to think yourself healthy. Thanks again, guys. Bye.